Welcome back to Kind Regards the show. When I was a young man, when I was about 16, had a bit of a crisis of, I suppose, mental health. I'd been on exchange to Germany. I spent a year overseas, and then I came back. And I was having trouble sort of like, I guess like settling back into school and things. And I remember a friend of my Ma's who heard about sort of my troubles, and I was quite anxious and like depressed, and I was quite like moody and broody, like many 16-year-olds are. And she suggested very kindly that I like think about mindfulness. Said, have you thought about that? And I thought that this was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. From my perspective, I was dealing with the weight of the whole world. I was scribbling in notebooks about how, gardens are a perversion of nature, and, what is the meaning of all of this stuff? And I was dealing with like big existential sort of questions, and the idea that sitting down and trying to calm myself down and focus on my breathing would help me figure out how to be in the world, how to live my life was, it was laughable. I thought it was absolutely absurd. And I suppose I didn't know much about mindfulness now. Now I realize that mindfulness philosophically is actually quite deep. And I'll get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about in this video is the sort of biological foundations of social and intellectual well-being. And the framework I want to use for this is Robert Pirsig's Metaphysics of Quality, which I've talked about previously on the channel. But the basics of it are this. Robert Pirsig writes 2 books. One is called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is very sort of well-known and widely read. Quite an influential book that was written in the 70s. And in that book, one of the things that he does is he breaks down the subject-object metaphysics, which is the idea that is very, very common in the Western world. So common, in fact, that it's almost invisible. The idea is that everything in the world can be attributed to either subjects or objects, right? The subject is this sort of viewing thing, the mind, and then the objects are just matter. It's all physical stuff. And if you want to know what is that over there? What is that rock I see? The first question, whether we ask it clearly to ourselves or not, the first sort of question, the first division, philosophically, is it an object or is it a subject? Is it in my head? Is it in my mind? Or does it physically exist in the external world? And this framework, like I said, is super widespread and claims to have the world on lock, claims to have the world figured out. It's all subjects and objects. And he essentially starts breaking down this idea and sort of questioning it when he turns to the idea of quality or value. Where does quality or value, goodness, sit in all of this? Either, he thinks, according to the subject-object metaphysics, it's in the object or it's in the subject. And he examines both of these sort of potentials, is value objective or is value subjective? And he realizes that both of them sort of break down. The value can't really clearly fit into either, and it has attributes, some attributes of both, but not all attributes of both. And so he's confused by this because it's a exhaustive list, right? Either it's subjective or it's objective. It cannot be both. That is not the framework that he's been provided with. And so he says, well, okay, what do we do now? Well, maybe I could say that it's neither and that it's a third category. There's subjective, objective, and quality. Or maybe I could say that it's, it precedes them. So actually subjects and objects come from quality, which is actually the move that he makes. But I won't go into that too long because it's some philosophical detail that hopefully is superfluous to this video. Read the books if you want more, I suppose. Anyways, in the second book, after breaking down the subject-object metaphysics and saying, actually, maybe quality is more fundamental, that's kind of his, maybe quality is more fundamental than subjects or objects, and should, in fact, be the primary metaphysical category with which we start with. We start with quality. In the second book, he says, okay, let's start with quality and let's build a new metaphysics, let's build a new idea. And so what he does is he divides the world up into two kinds of quality. So first of all, everything is value, everything is goodness. And then he says, okay, but there's two kinds of goodness. There's the goodness that exists and has previously existed. That's static value patterns, he calls it, because it's sort of the patterns, it's in the name, it's the stuff that repeats itself over time, through time. So this jacket is, an inorganic value pattern. It's a physical value pattern. It holds itself together in time, over time, so it's a pattern of sort of molecular stuff, and tension and weight and all of these sort of physical forces are in sort of a holding pattern. And then there's on top of, so that's kind of the static stuff, and I'll get into the details of the static stuff in just as the dynamic. I can't say stuff because when he says dynamic quality, it's the stuff that hasn't really been invented yet. It's the creative sort of drive of the world. It's the sort of cutting edge of innovation before things get saved in the static patterns, right? Static patterns sort of keep things where they are. They're static sort of latches, and then dynamic quality pushes things forward. It's a bit of like a leap forward. And you can think of it in evolutionary terms. Our static pattern are sort of our genetic makeup, or our DNA, whatever helps us exist through time. And then the dynamic quality event, the dynamic quality moment, would be maybe genetic mutation or sex selection, when the two sets of genetics make a new thing that has never been before. That's this sort of dynamic moment. And so we've got dynamic over here. That's just an evolutionary example that it exists all throughout, in the physical sort of non-biological worlds. It exists, gravity didn't exist and then it did exist. The Big Bang happened. There are various ways in which the physical world evolves. Anyways, I'll get into the static patterns now. He divides them up into 4 categories in order of their sort of cosmological evolution. And the categories are such, I hope the waves aren't too loud. A boat's just gone by, so that's kind of why it's picking up, but I hope you don't mind. Excuse me if this is no good for you. He starts with inorganic value patterns, and that is everything physical that does not contain DNA. Then he goes up to organic value patterns, which is everything physical which does contain DNA. Animals, plants, blah, blah, blah. For the sticklers for detail, RNA viruses probably can be included here. These definitions are loose. They're just kind of useful until they're not. He's not making any kind of objective claim about reality because he rejects the nature of objective knowledge and the categories of object and subject generally, like I mentioned. He doesn't reject their usefulness, but he thinks that they're limited in their usefulness, as all concepts are, and that he can build a better thing. So he's just setting them aside for now. Then there's the social patterns, which is like the cooperation exhibited by higher primates, or again, you can extend it to maybe ant colonies, or you can keep it to just human beings and their sort of handshake etiquette and money systems, the religious institutions, politics, these sort of things are all sort of social patterns, the way that we socially organize and exhibit cooperation. And then fourthly, the intellectual value patterns, which are the manipulation of symbols independent of what those symbols represent. So that, if I point at the camera and I say that's a camera, yes, I'm manipulating symbols with language, but I'm actually not doing it independent of what those symbols represent. I'm not making a hypothetical. I'm not doing theory. Instead, I'm pointing and naming things. So that's the independent of what the symbols represent. As soon as it becomes hypothetical and theoretical, conceptual, more than simple representation, we're on. We're in the realm of the intellectual. And the intellectual patterns include some of the best stuff we've ever thought of, which is, all people are created equal and should be treated as such, human rights, trial by jury, innocent until proven guilty, innocent until proven guilty, the value of democracy, or on and on. There's heaps of great ideas out there. And so these exist in a sort of hierarchy, and they evolved. First there was just stuff, and then there was physical stuff and living physical stuff, and then there was complex living physical stuff that was so complex that it could cooperate with other animals and, I guess like dominate biologically, right? Like the cooperative species are, generally speaking, the most dominant species. Pack hunting in wolves, ants and bees are unbelievably dominant because of the things that they can achieve as a collective is insane. Obviously, human beings are one of the most, probably the most cooperative or socially complex animal. And look how well we've done at like securing food and our own survival. And then, of course, there were such complex social structures that we could actually manipulate symbols to such a degree. We could invent symbols and then manipulate them to such a degree that we could come up with abstract knowledge, which of course catapults us even further into, incredible innovation and to a large degree freedom. And so let's bring it back to the 16-year-old boy. He's dealing with existential questions. I'm reading Kerouac and Tom Wolfe and I don't know, probably Hunter S. Thompson, probably too much Hunter S. Thompson, honestly. But I'm trying to figure out what it is to be on the earth and what my value is and how I'm supposed to live a good life and whether making money is inherently evil and all these sort of big fundamental questions. And at the same time, not exercising. I was not eating particularly well or paying any kind of attention to my diet. I was not doing any kind of meditation or breath work. I had no methods by which I could calm my body and achieve a state of stasis. I wasn't stretching to release tension in my body. And on top of that, I didn't have great social structures. I was not a part of any group. I rejected my school really hard. I identified with hating my school and with, I found education to be this like stifling thing, and I wanted to reject it. And if rules didn't make sense, I refused to obey them and made a whole bunch of trouble for myself. So I had a couple friends, but my social sort of cohesion with the rest of society was very weak, and I found very little fulfillment in that, and I saw very little value in it too. And so on the intellectual level, I was flying. I was trying really hard to figure stuff out and think good thoughts. And yet on the other sort of levels, I'm ignoring the physical level, because how much can we really do on like the inorganic physical level? I can't actually interact with my chemistry, at least as far as I'm aware, in any kind of meaningful way. So I'm just sticking to the biological, the social, and the intellectual here. The biological, like I said, I was shunning and avoiding, feeling any kind of responsibility to it. And same with the social. I was just social enough to sort of get by and not very much more. And this is a huge mistake. Now, when I look back, I see that the huge sort of blind spot that was there, which is that I thought I could skip straight to the top of the hierarchy and I could just deal with abstract ideas, and that the rest of the stuff was kind of not worthy of me, that I was dealing with higher things. Why would I sit down and meditate when I could read a book, or ruminate? Why would I go out and join a sports team when I could be at home, trying to figure out the meaning of life? It doesn't make any sense to me. It didn't make any sense to me. But now there is nothing that makes more sense to me than that, because these levels are built upon one another. If the molecules that make up my biology do not adhere together and form stable compounds, then my biology cannot exist. If my biology does not continue, my mind, my social and intellectual capacities, if I'm starving hungry and I haven't drank water for days, I can't exactly go to a knitting group and be really nice to a bunch of old ladies, right? I need my biology in order to feed or sustain myself during in the social world. And similarly, I need the social world in order to sustain me in the intellectual world. And so all of this is to say, I suppose, or it all came from this morning, I did some breathing. I did some Wim Hof breathing. And Wim Hof breathing, you breathe in and out rapidly, or maybe not rapidly, but you take a full breath in and then you let some out, and then you take another full breath in and you let some out, and you do that maybe 30 times until your fingers get a bit tingly, or your toes. Then you breathe out, you hold your breath until you can't hold your breath any longer. You take a deep breath in, hold that for 15 seconds, breathe out, and then you repeat that. So essentially you kind of intentionally hyperventilate. It doesn't sound attractive, but it is. Then you do a big breath hold, then you do a recovery breath and repeat. So it's pretty simple stuff. And I got onto this, part of my journey of getting onto this, I watched a video by Stuff I've Learned, who's a great YouTuber. And he said the reason Wim Hof breathing is so popular and sort of renowned is because you can't do it without feeling really, really good afterwards. It can't happen. Like it proves itself immediately. It's not something that you build up to. It's not something that, that takes, weeks in order to kick in, and it's a slow sort of gradual process. No. You do 3 rounds of this and you will feel way better than you did before. That's basically a guarantee of the process itself. And this morning I laid down. I didn't really want to do it, but I did. I laid down and I did this breathing and I felt fantastic. I felt so good. And then I had some breakfast and I read these little affirmation cards that I've written that are designed to sort of keep my head aware of the values that I think are most important. Doing this work is really important and that I should try really hard. And if the work isn't good, then I shouldn't post it. And, that I'm here to make a contribution to others. I'm here to have a good relationship with my wife, all these kind of cards. So I read those and then ate something, and then I came out and did this. And this is all to say that as living, social, and thinking beings, we all have our foundation in the physical and biological worlds. And if we neglect these worlds, we'll have a really, really hard time forming adequate social relations with the wider world of human beings. And we will also have an incredibly hard time thinking good thoughts. If your body is tense, so below, 2 above, or 2 above, so below, if your body is tense and uneasy and anxious, the thoughts that arise out of that are tense, uneasy, and anxious thoughts, which in turn feed the body, and it continues on this self-stoking loop. And this is bad for our thinking. If we stay in these loops long enough, they feel all too real and like the only legitimate way of being, which is what I was when I was a youngster. I thought the only legitimate way of being was to be depressed about the state of the world, anxious about my relationship with others because it's so uncertain and I have of properly defining these things. And my anxiousness was so constant that the idea of it not being there and me being like a still being a person in the world who was a reasonable person, who still thought reasonable thoughts, was completely insane. Like it didn't occur to me that I could exist and not be anxious at the same time, because so constant was the sort of anxiety and feelings of hopelessness. And to pay proper attention to our biological foundations, to be able to run out the anxiety and then meditate out or gratitude out the depression or whatever, stretch out the tension, get nice and loose, sustain our body with good foods instead of high carbohydrate or high sugar foods that shoot us up into this weird food high where we're skittish and we can because we're so cooked on sugar, and then lead us into this sort of brain dead crash 30 minutes later. If we do that, and that's our state of mind, either we are manic or we are like I said, brain dead and sort of depressive and like, oh, whatever. These are our two states. And as such, the two sets of thoughts that we operate in are going to be like this. They're going to reflect our underlying biological, I suppose, well-being or state. Yeah, this is a huge point to me because it moves health from being, I want to stay alive and I don't want to die soon, which is what it has been for me for most of my life. Oh, I should probably exercise because I don't want to die like soon. It would be nice if I could walk into my 80s instead of being in a wheelchair in my 70s, so I should probably go for a run. It moves exercise and taking care of your health and eating well from the realm of purely biological stuff. I just need to sustain my person, and it treats it instead as a foundation for other things that you find even more meaningful. If we eat well, we will be better friends. If we eat well, we will be more patient with our mum when she, really tests us with that thing that she always says, and she knows it annoys me, or whatever, whatever the thing is. Mum, if you're watching, it's not about you. I was thinking about someone else's mum. Yes, if we exercise in the morning, or exercise every day, or regularly, we stretch and we do breath work and these things. I'm just picking the things that I do, but there's a million ways of being healthy. I don't want to say that there's only these ways, but if we do these things, we will be better at reading books. We'll be better at thinking thoughts. Our journaling will be more insightful. Brains will work better, and they'll be more apt to concentrate, to think things through, not to jump to conclusions. It goes on and on. And similarly, the social world is not just here for its own sake. Having friends is not just here so that we, don't feel lonely on Friday nights. Instead, having friends, being a part of a community, having relationship to the people in your lives, having deep relationship, I should say, all feeds into our well-being, our bodily well-being. People who socialize, live longer, who are readily social. They talk about this in Japan and in Greece, all the blue zones. They're deeply social and are seeing people outside of their family every day. They're seeing people that they see a lot every day. So they're social, they have lots to get up for, and it's really good for our health, and it's also good for our intellectual ideas. It grounds us in our effects on other people. Every idea can be readily tested against the social effect that it can have on other people, and you can run it through other people's minds. Why is it a scientific community? It's because we need to run ideas through other people's heads. Why does philosophy work best often in the academy? It's so that we can run ideas through other people's experience. How do we do that? It's through social connection, social network. Yeah, I think that's pretty solid stuff. I could talk about this idea all day. Because I love those two books. They are the most illuminating thing that has ever happened to me. Reading Lila, An Inquiry into Morals, which is the second book. I should have said that earlier, but that book settled my intellectual in a way that nothing else has ever since or had before. It was absolutely revolutionary. And I've read them both, I don't know, 5 times, maybe more, over the course of the last sort of 5-10 years. And 5-10 years, 8 years. It's not 5 years. I've been reading them for a while. And yeah, I could just go on and on about the sort of virtues of these ideas. If the virtues aren't clear, I'd love to hear from you and to, yeah, perhaps make another video sort of addressing what's been left out or what's been maybe miscommunicated. Yeah, but thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful, this sort of little video about the biological foundations for our social and intellectual well-being. Yeah, I hope this finds you well. I've got a Substack link below because I write articles, and I also have Spotify and YouTube links too, and I'll also link stuff you should know. What is it? Stuff I've learned or something. That YouTube account, that's great for all things, you know, bodily well-being, you know, fasting, exercise, sleep, and breathing and all this stuff. He makes really great, like scientifically rigorous, it feels like at least, videos. So check those out too. Thanks very much. Take care.